Good morning. So yesterday we heard a bit about these 7 moods or attitudes of the we evoke in the sevenfold puja, which invite the enlightened mind, and how we can invoke them at other times as well. Today, what we're going to do is look at them in a bit more detail. So we're going to have 3 short talks on the various stages. So we're going to kick off with Bodhinaga, who's going to be talking about the first 3 stages. Worship, salutation and going for refuge, or offerings, bowing, and committing to act by the values that we're invoking, inviting. So he's going to kick us off, and then Maitridasa is going to talk about confession and rejoicing in merits, and finally Satyajyoti is going to talk about entreaty and supplication, asking for a teaching, and transference of merits and so on. So there he is. So I'll hand over to Bodhinaga to talk about the first 3 of the 7 modes.
In 2004, I went on the Inca Trail in Peru, in the Andes in Peru, to see Machu Picchu. And it was a trek, basically a guided tour over 4 days, following the Inca Trail to arrive at Machu Picchu. And the preparation hadn't been brilliant. I spent the 4 months previously on a beach in Brazil, just sunbathing basically. So when I went to the high altitude of the Andes, I wasn't very well prepared for it, and I got altitude sickness, and also I think I got food poisoning as well. So I had a pretty rough time of it, and I was feeling quite sorry for myself, very sorry for myself. But there was a kind of an ordeal and a sense of making an effort to get to a goal. But I was very much kind of preoccupied with my health and feeling sorry for myself. But on the 4th morning, we were walking through the valley in the Andes, and turned the corner, and there in front of me was Machu Picchu. Machu Picchu, and it was breathtaking. It took my breath away, and it was just this amazing, beautiful, sacred place. And straight away, I was just lifted out of my preoccupations. I was lifted out of my worries about myself, and I just experienced awe, really, and reverence. That was a kind of a personal experience of reverence from natural beauty, and also from something which men have created as well, to honour the ideal. So that was about 8 years ago in 2004. But a lot of the time, it's not like that. A lot of the time, I've got a big sense of self-importance. I I think my needs are very important. I think my views and my opinions are very important, more important than anybody else's. And so a lot of the time, I'm preoccupied with myself. And over time, I built up quite a mountain-sized sense of self-importance. And a lot of the time, that gets in the way. That can get in the way. It can get in the way of me connecting with other people. And it can get in the way of me appreciating something higher, something that's really beautiful, something that's valuable. And but sometimes something breaks through that. Sometimes something might just break through that, something that's really beautiful or higher, or something that just rings of truth. It might break through all of that self-importance and just lift me out of my self-preoccupation. Sangharakshita uses the metaphor of a mountain and a mountaineer to describe the relationship with the ideal in a talk he gives about the sevenfold puja. And I think it's particularly helpful with this relationship between the first three stages. There's definitely a process between these first three stages of basically noticing something very, very beautiful and celebrating that, acknowledging it, and then making a commitment to move towards it. So Sangharakshita describes this first stage of worship and reverence as basically a mountaineer just coming across and seeing upon him this immense beauty of this mountain peak, this beautiful mountain peak. And reading that brought to mind this experience at Machu Picchu. And and basically the experience in this first stage is one of celebration. It's one of a joyful celebration of reverence, seeing something so beautiful, so magnificent. But then what happens after that, we become aware of ourselves in relation to this ideal. So the mountaineer becomes aware of his position himself, how small he is in comparison to this massive mountain before him, the distance he has to travel before he reaches to it. There's a separation of distance. So this second stage, obeisance, salutation, bowing, is really acknowledging the difference between where we're at and the ideal. And the ideal is something much higher than we are, something beyond where we are now. But then the third stage, the mountaineer, inspired by what he's seen, the beauty he's seen, acknowledging his position, he's inspired to move, he or she inspired to move towards the mountain, to climb the mountain peak, to move towards it. And this is what Sangharakshita describes as the third stage, going for refuge, the stage where we commit to live by the ideals, to follow the ideals, to practice them. So that's what I'm going to talk about now, is just talk about these first three stages and the relationship between them. We've heard a lot about reverence and bowing already, and we've learnt a lot about it yesterday. So what I'm going to do for the first couple of stages is probably more, give a few more personal experiences to just to perfume and add to what we've heard already. So when this first stage of reverence and worship is, we heard yesterday, when our metta, when our loving kindness, our love meets something higher than we are. And the natural, spontaneous response to this is reverence, actually. When our love meets something higher than we are, we revere it, we respect it. And this can sometimes, it can be a spontaneous and intuitive response, an emotional response, where something inside you resonates or recognises something of the beauty or the truth that you've encountered. I had an experience of this. I was in Sri Lanka a couple of years ago, and I went to visit a statue or place, the place was called Alkana, and there was this big, huge, I'm going to make up a size, I don't know how big it was, 30 foot, something like that. That seems big to me. It was very, very big, and statue of the Buddha. And it was 1,500 years old at least. It had been built over 1,500 years ago, carved out of a mountain. And it was absolutely awe-inspiring. And Lucy and I were on our honeymoon in Sri Lanka, and we got the taxi driver to take us to this place. And because it was out of the way, there weren't many people there, so it was pretty quiet. And we were the only people. It just felt like there was just really me and this huge statue of the Buddha that had been carved by disciples of the Buddha 1,500 years ago. And my intuitive response was just real respect, real reverence, and just instinctively what I wanted to do was to bow to the statue, to prostrate before the statue, and to chant the Triratna Vandana, which is similar to the Refuges and Precepts. It's a Pali chant in reverence of the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha. So sometimes we can have this very strong emotional, intuitive response of reverence. For Buddhists, what we revere, what makes us a Buddhist, what we revere was the enlightened mind, as we heard. And that's also called sometimes the triple gem or the three jewels. That's an expression of the enlightened mind, of enlightenment. So we've got the Buddha, and the Buddha represents the principle of awakening, of enlightenment, the possibility for us to awaken, the possibility for every human being to awaken. And that's represented by the Buddha. So when we're saluting the shrine and we're saluting the Buddha, we're saluting that possibility. That the possibility exists for us and for everyone. And then there's the Dharma. We revere, we respect the Dharma, which again is an aspect of the enlightened mind, the truth itself, but also the teachings, the path that we can follow to awaken ourselves. So we revere the Dharma, the Buddha and the Dharma, and we revere the Sangha. And in the highest sense, in the sense of the enlightened mind, well, the Sangha is all the enlightened people throughout space and time, throughout history, throughout space and time. All the archetypal embodiments of enlightenment, all the human beings who have awakened throughout time. So that's what, when we revere the Sangha, we're revering all the enlightened people. And the people basically who've kept the Dharma alive for us through time. There's been a lineage of practice for 2,500 years which has passed the Dharma down from person to person. But also we can revere the Sangha that we're part of, the Sangha that we create, the Sangha that we build, and the atmosphere, that what we create within us. And that's something we can respect, well, we do respect and we revere as well. So as Buddhists, one way we revere the idea, one way is by revering the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha. And I can remember encountering the Dharma for the first time, in particular studying some texts with Vedanya. We studied the Bodhicharyavatara, which is the verse we've heard about, the text we've heard about this weekend. And also the White Lotus Sutra. There were two early texts that I studied with Vedanya. And I remember each time encountering the verses, it was just a real joyful response. There was something, I just knew, something in me knew that this was true. It's almost like I was being reminded of something I'd forgotten. This was definitely true, and there's something in me knew it was true. And there's a real sense of reverence and respect for these texts, these ancient texts, which just seem to be still alive after how many thousand years, 2,000 years since they were first written. So we can have this very intuitive response to beauty, to truth, and to the three jewels. But that might not happen. It might not always happen that we have a kind of really strong emotional upwelling of joy or devotion or reverence or respect. And that's okay, because over time we've heard already how we can cultivate reverence and we can cultivate respect. It's a faculty, it's something we can cultivate within us. And I think it's just logical. It makes sense to me that, well, if reverence comes out of metta, it comes out of love meeting something higher than us, well then the stronger I love the ideal, well then when I encounter it, the more reverence I'm going to experience. So, and that metta is something that I can cultivate, it's something that I can develop. And it's going to develop over time. The more I develop a relationship with the three jewels, with my ideals, well the more I'm going to grow to love them, and the more I'm going to revere them and respect them. And it's not that's not going to that process may not happen overnight. It's going to be something that deepens gradually over time, and that's been the case. The case for me. So in terms of the Buddha jewel, I've seen over time that the possibility of growth exists. And intuitively, it felt true when I encountered it, but now, I've seen over the past 8 years, I've changed beyond what I would have thought would have been possible. I just wouldn't have been able to imagine the transformation. I've seen my friends, people in the Sangha, change. So there's no question for me. I know that spiritual growth is possible, and I know that, well, if you take that to its logical conclusion, enlightenment is possible. So so I've begun to really be grateful and respect, revere the principle of the Buddha of awakening. Through testing out the Dharma, I know the Dharma is true. I know it works. I know the teachings are true. So again, my love for the Dharma has deepened, and just my experience of Sangha has been it's been a real joy actually. The last 8 years, just getting to know people in the Sangha, practicing with other people in the Sangha. Well, I've just begun to rely upon the Sangha and to love the Sangha. So I think it's just something that will naturally deepen over time. The more we engage with these ideals, we're going to develop a relationship with them over time, and our love will deepen over time. The more we test them out, try them out, we're going to cultivate a love for these ideals. So I think that's a way into reverence. So how, whether it's spontaneous, whether we cultivate it over time, we will experience love, gratitude for the Dharma, for the three jewels, the possibilities. And the traditional way to express that is, or the way we may wish to do that spontaneously is through making an offering. And so we can make an offering just to express our love and devotion. And we can, in the first stage of the puja, we are imaginatively bringing to mind all the most valuable, all the most precious things that we want to offer. The things that are most valuable to us, we want to offer them to our ideals. And then we can make a physical offering. We can offer candles, we can offer light, And these are just ways, as we've seen yesterday, of expressing our love, our respect, our reverence for the ideal. And for me, this is the part of the puja I really enjoy. I really enjoy seeing people getting up and making offerings in a way. I can just see mirrored in other people my love for the ideal. I don't love the ideal because somebody's told me to. I love it because I recognise the value of it. And then if I see other people who impress me, who I respect and admire, and I see that they also love these ideals, they also respect these ideals, well, that just fills me with confidence, and it fills me with joy as well, a real joy. And so there's something I really enjoy about this collective chanting of a mantra, collective making offerings, just a collective act in general of the puja, where we're each of us expressing our love for the ideal. Well, it's magical. And I've had, the last couple of evenings, the pujas we've done, just been very joyful, magical pujas for me. So, what next to say? So, then the natural expression of that is moving into the second stage, where we notice ourselves in relation to this ideal. So there's a great kind of celebration in the first stage, but then along with it comes a recognition and acknowledgement. Well, the ideals are beyond where we are now. They are higher than we are now. There's a distance between us and the goal, and we acknowledge that. And it's a powerful thing to acknowledge that. As we're starting to learn, and we may have experienced, it's a very powerful thing to acknowledge. There's this distance, this separation between you and the ideal. And I just thought I'd like to share just a few experiences I've had of that. And the first one was again from this trip to Sri Lanka, this pilgrimage to Sri Lanka. And we went to a place which I can't remember the name of now, unfortunately. It's a place where it's like a complex, a monastery, lots of different Buddha rupas, ancient temples, and the ruins have been excavated. It might come to me, I can't remember at the moment. And in this particular part of it, there was a part that was particularly ruined. There weren't any exciting statues, but the guide had learnt that we were Buddhists, and he took us to this place. And he said, well, this is where the monks really practiced. There used to be a huge statue of the Buddha here, but it's not there anymore. It was an ancient shrine room, a shrine room from 1,000 years ago, and there was an atmosphere, a kind of sense that this place, people had worshipped, people had meditated inside this shrine room, however long it was ago, and it was still an important place that people respected now. But because there weren't any big, dramatic statues, the tourists didn't go there. It wasn't a place that people would go to very often, but we were taken there. And again, my response was a response of reverence and respect, and I wanted to bow to this place where the statue would have been. So I did a kind of a polite English, kind of embarrassed, kind of little tilt of my head towards this place. And the guide and the monk who tended the place were kind of chuckling to themselves with it. And the guy came over and said, well, that's not how Buddhists make an offering in this country. They don't make an offering in this way. They get down, they put their knees on the floor, they touch their head to the floor and show that this place is above them, beyond them. So I could see my English conditioning, my kind of embarrassment of expressing reverence and respect. So I thought, well, stuff that, and I did a full-length prostration and got my knees and I'll show them who's a Buddhist. My knees and my twist. So that's part of that. It was a mixed motive. It was a competitive streak came out. But there was definitely a sense of reverence and respect for this place, this ancient place of worship, and it was liberating actually to throw my embarrassment out of the window and just to respect it and to revere it, acknowledge it. There was another one I wanted to mention as well. What was that? It was a sunrise this morning actually, getting out of my tent this morning and unzipping the door and being cold in the night, and then suddenly there wasn't mist there was just a beautiful sunrise. There was the sky was filled with gold and yellow and blue, and there was trails of aeroplane smoke, and there's a mist over the lake. And again, I was just deeply moved by that, and particularly with Vidanya encouraging us yesterday to acknowledge that. And so what I did was just naturally felt, well, I'm going to bow to it. So I bowed to the reservoir, and it didn't feel strange. It didn't feel weird. It felt very joyful. It actually acknowledging the beauty freed me up just to celebrate it even more. It was just a celebration, a feast of delight, as Shantideva might say. So, having been inspired and then humbled by the beauty of the ideal, well then we are moved to make a commitment, we're moved to live by the ideal, we're moved to practice by the ideal, to move ourselves in the direction, to align ourselves with the ideal. So we're moved to make ourselves an expression of this beauty, to cultivate more kindness, to cultivate more generosity, to help to build a Sangha where other people can contact the Dharma, other people can benefit like we have. So this is a stage of going for refuge, and it's a stage where our guts get involved, our volition, our energy gets involved, and we're moved to act on our inspiration. And this is crucial. And Sangha actually says, well, this is what makes somebody a Buddhist. It's the act of going for refuge is what makes somebody a Buddhist. And it's not enough to just admire the ideals, to admire the three jewels, to think, well, loving kindness is a good idea, generosity is a good idea, the Buddha was a great person. It's not enough to admire. It's not enough even to bow and to prostrate before the ideals. What we need to do is to live by them, to act on them, and to make a commitment to change, to move towards the ideals. That's what makes somebody a Buddhist. And again, it's for me a joyful part of the puja is when, collectively with other people, like-minded people who I admire and respect, I just chant that commitment. I give voice voice to that commitment. I'm chanting Pali, the verses of refuge and the precepts. And what we're chanting, we chant Buddhang Saranang Gacchami, which means in Pali, which is an ancient Indian language, I go for refuge to the Buddha. And the same, Dharmang Saranang Gacchami, Sanghang Saranang Gacchami, I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. And that's what makes me a Buddhist, is that I've committed to practice the ideals. I've committed to follow the possibility of awakening to its conclusion, to gain enlightenment for all beings, to practice the Dharma, the path that takes me there, and to cultivate Sangha, to help other people to practice. And so I just like to share an experience of going for refuge. Again, I think going for refuge is something that will deepen and we can cultivate. It's something that deepens over time. And I had a strong experience on my first week-long retreat. I went down to Padmaloka Retreat Centre in Norfolk, and again it was with Vidanya, so I owe a lot to Vidanya for my experiences of programs. And Vidanya was leading down a retreat on the Bodhicharyavatara, which is the text that we're looking at. And we were studying these 7 moods, these 7 attitudes over the period of the week. We were studying this text, and in the evenings we were doing really long, elaborate pujas based on the text of the Bodhicharyavatara. And gradually over the evenings, I was really throwing myself into these moods and trying to experience the moods during the puja. And one evening in the puja, I just had this sense of lineage really in Sangha. I just had a sense of, well, I'm benefiting because of all the people before me who've gone for refuge, all the people who've committed themselves to practice these principles, these ideals, all the people who've kept the Dharma alive and passed it down from person to person. Well, right now I'm receiving the gift of their life really. They've dedicated themselves to practicing the Dharma, and right now I'm receiving the benefit of that. And then it just struck me, well, what am I going to do with that? What should I do with that? In a way, I could just say, well, thanks a lot. I'm going to practice the Dharma, and I'm going to become happier and more content. And then, that's it. Well, I just thought, and that's not enough. I can't just receive the benefit of all these people's practice and not pass it on myself. So it just became very clear to me then. Well, that's what I want to do. That's what I need to do really with my life, is to build Sangha, help to build Sangha, help to pass the Dharma on for people in the future. And that was a very, very strong experience of going for refuge, of deepening commitment. I just realised, well, actually, this is the commitment I need to make. I need to pass this on to other people. So I've probably spoken for too long. But I just wanted to say, just what accompanies that sense of going for refuge, that sense of commitment, is joy for me, real joy and clarity. And those times when I'm just really in touch with my commitment and my inspiration, everything just seems to make sense. Everything is very lucid, very clear. There's a real kind of sense of joy and lucidity with those times when I'm really in touch with my commitment. And there's definitely this relationship between these 3 stages where we recognise the beauty of something, we acknowledge our distance, our separation from that beauty, from that truth. And that inspires us to move towards it, to go for refuge, to make a commitment to move towards it. And very quickly, I was watching Sport Relief on Thursday with my brother. I went to my brother's house and his wife had Sport Relief on Thursday night. And they had a programme about a comedian called John Bishop, who's a Liverpudlian comedian. And what he decided to do to raise money, he raised over £1 million for people in Africa, was to spend a week travelling from Paris to London. The way he did it was to cycle from Paris to Calais. Rather than catch the ferry, he rowed across the channel, having just slept for 2 or 3 hours, with other people helped him to row, other sports people. And then he ran 3 consecutive marathons for 3 days from Dover to London. And it was just really moving to see his ordeal really documented in this TV programme. And just actually after about 3 days, the pain he was in, the kind of sheer fatigue of having spent 2 days travelling from Paris to Dover and then having to run 3 consecutive marathons. And at this stage, he'd be lifted by people who pass him, which gives me a kind of an echo of Sangha, that the people who pass were cheering and kind of clapping and giving money and stuff. And he was lifted by that. But he was also lifted by remembering the people he'd seen in Africa and the suffering, and thinking, well, actually I can do something to help these people. So every time he'd kind of flag, he'd kind of remember. They showed an encounter with him and an 11-year-old girl in Sierra Leone, and their village where their river was polluted, and that was their drinking water and their toilet. And he just kept on. He ploughed through his real, in a way, his love for what was possible, kept him going. And on the 3rd day, he had a suspected hairline fracture in his leg, and he was in real pain. And he just kept going, and he was absolutely exhausted, and he kept going, and he completed it. And it just made me think, well, what are human beings capable of? With enough inspiration and love and commitment, we're capable of superhuman feats, really. And then it made me think, well, what would I be capable of in the spiritual life if I was that committed? If I was that committed to practice, what could I achieve? And if I really, really wanted to, and I really loved the ideals, I really saw how people were suffering and they could benefit from the Dharma, what could I achieve? And then it made me think, well, anything is possible for a human being. Anything is possible if we want it enough. Even awakening, even enlightenment.
So, going back to the picture of the house and inviting a guest to our house. So, in the first 3 stages, we've welcomed the guest into our house. We've offered them something. We've bowed to them, and we've started to engage with them. So just imagine that scene. And then, out of the corner of your eye, you just notice that there are some cobwebs in the corner that you forgot to clear up. And you're sort of trying to engage with your guest, but you're looking at those cobwebs. Please don't turn around, please don't turn around. So come with me, we'll go to another room. And you're on the way to the other room, and you remember that you've left an ashtray in there, which you didn't clear up. Okay. So let's go upstairs. You're walking upstairs, and you realise that you haven't cleaned the ring around the bath. Okay, on second thoughts, why don't you come back tomorrow? Okay, so in a way that's often my experience. Well, I've had that experience where I've invited a guest to my house and I've sort of prepared the house and they've come, and actually there's something on my mind and I haven't been able to engage with them. I haven't been fully present for them. I haven't been open to them. There's been something weighing me down. So in the puja, in the first 3 stages, we've delighted in the ideal, we've made offerings, we've bowed, we've committed ourselves. But then we're confronted with the sobering fact that we are actually a long way off. That there are things holding us back, maybe past actions, maybe ongoing habits. And ongoing habits include mental habits which create anxieties about the future. So we can just feel like we're carrying this heavy baggage, and we get a bit tired of it and we want to put the baggage down. So in full view of Sangha, ritually, we bring it all out into the open, we confess. And the effect of confession is to put that baggage down. We lighten our load. We're able more easily to move forward and to rejoice. And we rejoice in any steps forward by any being. We rejoice in the beings that have showed the way in the past. And we just rejoice in the beauty of the spiritual life and the peace and the joy and the freedom that it offers. So that's the theory. Okay. Well, I've always wondered, actually, why does recognising your faults and confessing them lead to rejoicing? Surely it should make you feel bad. Yeah? I mean, we laugh, but I mean, shouldn't it make us feel bad to concentrate on our faults? Aren't I better to go out to Waterstones, get a self-help book that tells me to think only of positive things? So why does confessing make us feel like rejoicing? At the time of the Buddha, one of his monks called Padali, he publicly declared that he wasn't going to carry out one of the Buddha's precepts. And his reason was that he thought it was too difficult for him and that he would fail, and then that would create all sorts of anxiety and would feel like giving up. So he didn't want to face that anxiety, so he declared, I'm not going to carry out this precept. And then for the next 3 months, while the monsoon retreat was going on, he sort of kept out of the Buddha's way. And some of his friends came up to him, and they just urged him to think carefully about what he'd done. They said to him, don't let it become more difficult for you later on. Pretty quickly after that, Padali clearly sees his fault, and he expresses his remorse to the Buddha. Now, the Buddha doesn't brush it away. The Buddha actually, his first response is to spell out the consequences of what he'd done to Padali, which was all around sowing doubt amongst the Sangha. But then he rejoices in Padali. He rejoices in the fact that Padali has made this confession. He says, it's good that you have worked this out for yourself. This is the basis for growth in the Dharma. Not doing this gets in the way of an effective spiritual life. A few years ago, I was in Calcutta, where I used to work, and I was visiting a friend of mine called Jackie. He's a Muslim, and he lives in a pretty grotty part of Calcutta, in the slum area. And I first met Jackie when he was quite young, and he came to the home where I was working, and he lost his parents, and he was a very naughty boy. And when I arrived at the home, the founder of the project said to me, this child is incapable of forming a loving relationship. And I just took that as a challenge. And so I took him under my wing and helped to bring him up. And so I was visiting Jackie, and by this time he was 18 or 19. He was recently married. And while I was visiting him, I left him some money as a wedding gift. And then I came back home. And then a few weeks after I got back, I got a letter from Jackie. And he wrote, something terrible has happened. Somebody has stolen the money that you gave me. Could you please send me some more? And I didn't doubt him, actually, because there was such a strong bond between us. But what I wrote to him was, don't be too angry with the person that's stolen the money, because they're probably going to be in suffering. Either their suffering caused them to steal the money, or stealing is going to cause them suffering. That's all I said. I said, I don't have any money to send you. I'll give you some more when I've got it. And that was that in my mind. And then a few weeks later, I got another letter. And it said, Uncle, I feel absolutely terrible. I told you a lie. I just wanted some more money. And then he just poured out his heart and how much he felt that he sort of let me down. And I could see in his writing the remorse that he felt. And my response was not, that's terrible. How dare you do that to me? My heart was filled with joy, and I sort of thought about it. Why do I feel happy that one of my friends has deceived me? Why do I feel happy? So I think there's three things that Jackie did right. Firstly, he recognised clearly his mistake. Not only did he recognise it with his mind, he felt regret about it. And he expressed that. So his head and his heart were both engaged. Second thing he did right was when it came down to it, he valued our friendship more than money. So he put a value on friendship, on connection. And the third thing he did right was that he realised he had to change. He realised for himself he had to change. And by doing that, he picked up the key to his own freedom. And when I reflected like that, I just thought, well, I'd spent quite a few years worrying about him. He didn't do very well at school. And so I had a lot of anxiety about him. But when this incident happened, I just thought, oh, he's going to be okay. He's got the key. He knows what to do with his life. So that was the experience for me of being in contact with confession of fault, which just led very naturally to, oh, this is great actually, this is great, someone's really making a change. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about those three elements. So first element of both confession and rejoicing. So I'm talking about both stages here. I mean, so far I've talked mostly about confession, but all the things I'm going to say apply to these two stages together anyway. So confession and rejoicing, it makes us clearer about ethics. It sharpens our ethical awareness. The Buddhist approach to ethics is very different, and particularly towards confession is very different to what we associate with confession. So generally in the West we associate confession with going into a dark, secret booth, secretly confessing sins, out of some fear of retribution, fear of disapproval. And the reason we do it is that the priest can absolve us, and then we somehow feel that we're back on God's good side. Not like that in Buddhism. So the Buddha is perfectly compassionate. That's an element of his enlightenment. He's perfectly compassionate. So the Buddha, as an ideal, is a compassionate friend and guide, not a final authority. So there are no veiled threats, no need for fear of punishment, but also there's no deliverance. So the consequences of our actions can't be undone; they can't be magicked away. So what we fear, if we experience fear in this regard, what we fear is not the Buddha himself, but the suffering that we cause ourselves and others. So morality in Buddhism is natural; it's not imposed. So when we act unskillfully, it's as if we're going against something that's intrinsic to us. And that's painful. It gives rise to a painful feeling of regret and remorse. But in Buddhism, this is seen as something positive, actually. This painful feeling of regret is a positive event. We don't confess to make ourselves feel bad. We confess to make things clearer. And when we talk about confessing unskillful acts, we're including self-hatred in that. So self-hatred in Buddhism is an unskillful action. So that is also something that needs to be cleared out of the way. So if, in response to recognising and expressing our faults, we just feel weighed down by guilt and bad feelings, then actually that's also something that needs to go. So we're making our ethical awareness more acute. But this doesn't just apply to unskillful things, it applies to skillful actions as well. So not only do we recognise the actions that hold us back, that sort of keep us tied down, we also recognise all the good done by all beings, including ourselves, that leads them towards happiness and wisdom. And we try to see clearly, what actions are leading people to happiness. And we see more clearly that we are creators of our own worlds. And we resolve to avoid actions that will hold us back. And we resolve to put ourselves in the best conditions to allow our natural ethical sensitivity to express itself. So in these two sections, one thing that we can keep in our mind is what is holding me back? What is holding me back from becoming who I could become? And the more specific we can be about this, the better. And so confession is an ethical action that naturally leads to the arising of rejoicing. So when we recognise clearly that we're not living up to our ideals, And that gives us, when we see that clearly, that gives us the motivation to do something about it. So we start to live more according to our ideals. And the more that we do this, the more confidence arises, peace, joy, and the more positive mental states we're experiencing, then the more freely we just start to rejoice. We rejoice in the life we are leading. We rejoice in our companions, in those that have shown us the way. We can just take delight in the spiritual life and feel grateful that this context is available here for us. So, the second element, the second thing that Jackie did right, he valued friendship. So as members of the Sangha, we have a shared responsibility actually to look after each other, to rely on each other, to inspire and encourage each other, even to belong to each other. Take it that far. But to do this we need to appreciate each other as growing spiritual beings, not just see each other in terms of what use we can be to each other. It's good to appreciate people's qualities and their skills, but sometimes that can fall into so-and-so's good at this, and that sort of represents them. They're the person that does that for the Sangha. So we just need to really appreciate each other as growing spiritual beings. The Sangha says that the essence of friendship is communication and taking delight. So these are two essences of friendship, communication and taking delight. So by allowing others to see you, to know you, and to help you is essential to human health and happiness. And this includes both sharing our mistakes and sharing our enthusiasm and our inspiration. So when people write an autobiography, so I've read, probably the first thing that they think about is what should I leave out? What shouldn't go in this autobiography? It can be humiliating to feel that we're not living up to the image that we want others to see of us. It can be quite humiliating. We resist being seen fully as we are. So as well as asking ourselves what's holding me back, we could ask ourselves, what am I anxious to cover? Which rooms in my house would I prefer my guest didn't see? So when we have sort of these sacred off-limits areas, these no-go zones, we're closing ourselves off to our friends. We're holding back from true communication. We might even find ourselves choosing the company of people where we feel less uncomfortable about, holding ourselves back. Friendship can't be forced, so this opening up to others can't be forced. Sometimes it's appropriate to be cautious, actually. But it's really important to gradually build trust and confidence in our friends, to believe that they truly want the best for us. So another mood that we can experience in these sections is just confidence that our spiritual friends are on our sides. We're in it together. It's important that we really see each other, take delight in each other, take delight in whatever spiritual beauty we see in people around us, and do this openly. So, if because of embarrassment we keep quiet when we know that there's something worthy of praise, when we see something in somebody that's worthy of a recognition, if we choose to keep quiet out of embarrassment, then that's a form of dishonesty, actually. That, in a way, that's untruthful communication. You're omitting to express what needs to be expressed. So we should try and take every opportunity to rejoice in what is good. And don't feel you have to balance it up with criticising faults. So it's sort of, this person is great at this, and they're wonderful at this, but rejoicing isn't a measured, calculated activity. It's an open-ended, expansive practice. If we really saw the beauty of another being, there'd be no limits to our expression of rejoicing. So whenever we see something worthy of rejoicing, we express it freely, without reserve, without embarrassment. And this is a vital Buddhist practice. It's a practice that benefits ourselves, it benefits others, and it creates a really positive atmosphere in which the Sangha can thrive. The third thing that Jackie did right, he realised he had to change. He picked up the key to freedom. So these two sections, confession and rejoicing, they represent a breakthrough. We can only make a full commitment, we can only really go for refuge after taking a realistic look at the real situation that we're in, with a lot of self-honesty. And we see the raw material that we're working with, but we also see the scale of the task, the length of the journey. And the response to that often is just this sort of big flashing neon sign which says, I must change. If I was free of this, I could be like that. If I could put that down, I'd be open to do that. So our main motivation for putting ourselves through confession is the liberation that it brings us. It's not to make us feel down, it's not to weigh us down, it's to free us up. So being honest with ourselves and others is the key to transformation. To attaining levels of consciousness outside of our ordinary everyday experience, to freedom. So usually we hold back from being open with others because of fear, a fear of change, fear of exposure, fear of being really seen for who we are, fear of having to give things up. But the thing we should really be afraid of is the suffering that comes from holding ourselves back. So in confession and rejoicing, we're exercising our ability to imagine freedom. Freedom from crampedness and fear into expansiveness and joy. And it's sometimes it feels like an epic, mythic struggle, particularly in a puja, between this almost unbearable light that we're trying to open up to and the habits and the tendencies that are darkening our lives. And this creates a tension. And because of this tension, Sangharakshita describes confession as a type of throwing up. We vomit up. This tension is raised to such a level that we can't help but bring things out into the open, into the light of day. So transformation is not a smooth, seamless process. We can't just hop on a train to enlightenment. Sometimes there are gates to batter down. Sometimes we have to let unhelpful tendencies and views wither away, pass away. And this is what is called spiritual death in Buddhism. But with spiritual death, of course, comes spiritual rebirth. So the birth of a being who's a little closer to realising their potential, who's more able to take delight in others, who's more able to rejoice in the good around them. So maybe we could imagine that one day, or one lifetime, our individual struggles might come to an end. We might just put all our baggage down, and then we're free. No more gates to batter down, no more faults to vomit up, no more mountains to climb, no more baggage to carry on our backs. Maybe so. But of course, there is no end to the struggles of the world. No end of tasks to do for those around us. So what we aspire to in the puja, what we're trying to imagine, the freedom we're trying to imagine is not an individual freedom, it's universal emancipation, universal transformation. So we start to align ourselves with all beings. And we do that by starting with specific beings, the beings around us, our brothers and sisters in the Sangha. And we rejoice in whatever action, however small, by whatever being, brings that transformation about. We see how precious it is and we rejoice in it. So the last verse of Rejoicing in Merit section, I rejoice in the will to enlightenment and the teaching, those oceans that bring happiness to all beings and are the abode of welfare of all beings.
Okay, so I'm going to have a go at slightly editing as I go along and just make my main points. So what I'm doing is I'm bringing us towards the end of the puja, towards the end of our spiritual journey, towards awakening, inviting in the enlightened mind. And it's a bit like we've arrived where we are full of joy and open. So as Maitridasa says, by rejoicing in the merits of all beings and ourselves, we're in a state hopefully of openness and of joy and delight in the world. So what we do then is called entreaty and supplication. So we ask for a teaching. And actually, it's not like, the Buddhas will teach us anyway. The Dharma is there. It's not. The important thing is that we are asking. So it's about asking as an action. For a while I worked as a fundraiser, and there's something about asking people for money that is really challenging and very interesting. But often they respond. And if you didn't ask, they wouldn't respond. But I have to go through a whole stage of getting myself ready to ask, which is about kind of being open, being confident. And I think there's something in the fact we're asking for teaching that's very powerful. And of course there are all those kind of Zen stories, aren't there, which I don't really know much about, but they're kind of like, you know, you have to go and ask the teacher 3 times or 10 times before they'll actually teach you the Dharma. So kind of putting ourselves in a receptive place that we're open and we're asking for the teaching. Okay, but even if we do that, things get in the way. And when I was writing this, first of all I had like 2 things that got in the way, and then I had 3 things. And at the moment I've got 5 things, okay? But I'm sure there are lots more that will get in the way for other people, so you can think of what your own are. So my first one is being too clever by half. Okay? So, which I'm afraid I suffer from quite a lot actually. But so this is where I think I know it already. Okay, so it's a bit like, I'm not quite sure why I brought myself to this place. I'm asking for teaching when I feel like I know it, and like somehow. I mean, I think it's, you know, it is part of our culture. When I kind of watch politicians arguing with each other or listen to them on the radio, I think, well, how do they ever find anything out about the world? Because they're just telling everybody what they think, and then someone comes up and says what they think how it should be. You think, where's the kind of opening up and the questioning in that? You know, it's a kind of really weird way to go around making policy, I think. But anyway, that's besides the point, really. I suppose what I think is that because of my conditioning, I thought it was very interesting when Madania said yesterday around when we're changing, in the process of change, there's a lot where we recognise things in ourselves that aren't helpful. And it's about how we can let go of those without kind of being horrible about ourselves. And for me, this is one area where it's like I realise that my conditioning has been, when I was in education and things, if I kind of said something vaguely intelligent in a group, I got loads of praise, you know? If I had a view or an opinion, I wrote it down, I got good marks for it. So actually having views and opinions is something that has been, and it's almost like integral to my self-identity. I'm the kind of person who has opinions about things. So it's not surprising that I bring that into the Dharma as well. And of course it's really important. I'm not saying that we should accept without considering what we're taught in the Dharma, absolutely not. Because, you know, the Buddha said, test everything out. You know, test it like you're tasting gold to check it's real gold. Test out the teachings that they work for you. But if we do feel that they work for us, we do need to be able to open up and take things in and let new ideas in. So if we think we're too clever and we know it already, how are we ever going to do that? And there's a story that of a professor goes to see a Zen teacher, and they're having a cup of tea together, and the Zen teacher pours out the tea, and he pours out a cup for himself, and then he starts pouring the tea into the professor's cup, and he just keeps pouring and pouring and pouring. So the water comes out the top of the cup, and it's running onto the table, and it's running off the table, it's sort of onto the floor, it's going everywhere. And the professor's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? You know, he's kind of thinking, I know Zen teachers are meant to be a bit mad, but this has kind of gone a bit crazy, you know. And well, the Zen teacher says, well, you know, if you're going to come and learn from me, you need to be like an empty cup. If you're already full, I can't teach you. Okay, so that's about, you know, receptivity, really being open to teaching. Okay, yeah. So that's one, is being too clever by half. Now another problem that gets in the way is thinking we're too stupid. Okay, we kind of think, oh, I can't do this stuff. How can I take these teachings on? I'm not that kind of person. I mean, if you're kind of coming across the Dharma as being something quite intellectual, you might think I'm not an intellectual person, didn't do well at school, that kind of stuff. Or you might just think I'm too bad. I am that one really bad person who can't change. There's all sorts of ways that we think we can't learn the Dharma, that we can't learn to become kinder and more open and more awake. And actually, you know, the Buddha said there is not one person who can't become enlightened. All beings can become enlightened, so we all can do it. And if that's our particular thing that's getting in the way, it's really important to try and get over it. And I've got another little story for this, which is, so apparently in Tibetan tradition, well, I know you have to, I used to go to a Tibetan group, and the way we studied, we learnt things off by heart. And I'm hopeless at learning things off by heart. I find it really difficult. So I found it really challenging, actually. And there's a story about some Tibetan monks, and one of them just can't learn things off by heart, so I really sympathise for him. And so he ends up, he can't study, he doesn't pass his exams, and he feels like he's really failing, he's never going to make any progress. So they give him the job of sweeping the shrine. So kind of years go by, and every day he's sweeping the shrine room, keeping it lovely and clean. And then one day the kind of head teacher goes down and he realises something's happened to this guy. It's like he has woken up, he has changed, just through the action of sweeping the shrine room mindfully and with all his awareness every day. He has changed, he's really transformed. And I think it shows that it's not through academic study that we change in the Dharma. It is through applying ourselves wholeheartedly, mindfully, to whatever it is we're doing. So all of us can be affected. We can all be open to the teachings of the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas. Okay, another one actually is, I think, confusing the teachings, the Dharma, with other systems of thought and ways of looking at the world. And I won't say very much about this, but it's a bit like, we all come in to meeting the Dharma with world views and things that we really like. And sometimes they seem really like the Dharma, but actually they're not the Dharma. And it can be quite a sort of long process of pulling that apart and seeing what is the Dharma and what isn't. And for me, I've got to see some of the kind of things that I thought almost were like sacred views I held had to be kind of pulled apart a little bit. Okay, I won't say too much about that now. But, yeah. A fourth thing actually is taking it all for granted. Recently I was talking to Sangharaj. I wasn't talking to Sangharaj, I was listening to Sangharaj. I was saying to Sangharaj, so let me tell you my I was listening to a talk he was giving, and he started the talk with this really long thing about, which was a bit kind of boring. I think he's really going on about this, I don't know what he's getting at, but it's this really long thing about how we approach coming to a lecture. And what he said was that, in a way, there are things we get into habits of doing. So, for instance, on a Tuesday night, we go to Sangha night, and what do you do at Sangha night? Well, you have baked potato, then you listen to a talk, and that's what you do. Okay, that's the habit we're in. Okay, and it's like, so that means that we're not bringing all ourselves to that talk, because we're just kind of wandering in and kind of, well, I sit down, and this is when I listen to a talk. And if we get into a habit of anything, and we're just doing it because that's what the tradition is, that's what you do if you're a Buddhist, that's what you do if you're studying, then we're not really bringing all ourselves into it. And I think you'll know the difference between if you kind of go into something like with loads of questions, opposed to the bit where you're kind of just sitting there just kind of going, oh yeah, that's kind of interesting. Yeah, do you see what I mean? So it's a bit like taking things for granted can really get in the way of being open. And that can happen in pujas, of course. Often in pujas, our concentration will fall away. We won't be open to what's going on. And it's the kind of practice, I suppose, to bring ourselves back if we can. Yeah. Actually, I also think we can take Sheffield for granted, actually, because we're so lucky in Sheffield that we've got a great Sangha, and actually there is at least one person who's moved here, and one person who's thinking of moving to Sheffield, who is going to move to Sheffield, because they want to appreciate what we've got and what we can just take for granted, that we have got a great centre and we have got a lot of people teaching the Dharma and a lot of opportunities. And of course, in many countries, there aren't any Buddhist centres and there aren't any Buddhist teachers. And people will go to huge lengths to listen to the Dharma, and we can just do it whenever we like, which is quite amazing. 30 years ago when people started in the West with the Dharma, there were hardly any Buddhist books, apparently. There was just like a little handful, and that's all people had. And now we have, you can just go on the internet, and there's access to Insight. All the Pali Canon is just there. And that's fantastic, but it means we can just kind of not see it as special as it really is, I think. Okay, and then my last thing that gets in the way for me, for being open and receptive to the teachings, is fear. It's interesting, actually, that Maitri Dasa talked about fear as well. Fear can really get in the way of us opening up, of us wakening up. And we can be afraid of being receptive for very good reason, from past experience. Perhaps we've opened up to things before and they've turned out not to be what we thought they were going to be, and we can feel very painful about that. We might have been, in the past we might have opened up to stuff and people have laughed at us about it, and that's very painful as well. But I think there's also a very sort of deep existential fear about losing something. So we've got an identity. So I was talking before about having an identity as someone who has opinions and views. And it's a bit like, so if I lose that identity, if I really open up, well, who am I going to be? And that's really scary, actually. That's really scary. Because I think if we are able to be completely receptive, well, actually, we're very nearly enlightened, if not completely enlightened. Because what being completely receptive would mean is that we'd be open all the time to what's really going on. We wouldn't be viewing it through our own views, opinions, concepts, how we think things should be. We'd actually be going with how they actually are. That's what true receptivity is. And although that's great, isn't it, it's also really scary, because it's just, well, where are we in that? It's like we're open to everything then. So I think that's like doing metta is such an important part of spiritual practice. And actually around the puja, of course, we have all this beauty, the beauty of the mantras, the beauty of the shrine and the flowers and the candles. And I think that beauty helps us to be more receptive, because it's kind of holding us. It's like we can open in a beautiful place. It's like, seeing the view here. Being on retreat centres are usually in beautiful places, because we can open up in the middle of beauty. And it's actually, just a little story about this from me, is that a few years ago I realised, so I was walking to work 4 or 5 days a week, the same route, and I live in Sharrow in Sheffield, and I was working down by where the showroom cinema is. So my walk goes through sort of very old, decrepit warehouses. There's the ring road. I go under an underpass to go under the ring road, and then come out to kind of warehouse land, like Decathlon is there and stuff. So it's not traditionally beautiful by any means. And sometimes I'd just be, like it's February and it's really dark and rainy and stuff, but I'd be walking home at night just kind of feeling really grim about it all, looking down. And I started doing this thing where I realised that if I looked up and I looked around, I would always find something really beautiful. So for instance, one time I was walking along and I looked up and I noticed, I'd never seen before, someone had just daubed blue paint on a red door. And it somehow just caught me, and those little things can catch you. It was so beautiful, and I'd never noticed it before. And another time I noticed, I'm not into cars, but I just looked up and the light was catching the bonnet of a car, and just the way that it kind of, the curve on it, people who are into cars probably know this more than me, but the curve of it was just really lovely actually. I was like, wow, so it's like, so there's beauty there. Every time I want to, it appears. If I open my eyes and I'm receptive, there is beauty. However, some days when I'm walking to work, I remember this and I think, oh, I don't want to do that. Why don't I want to do that? It's really strange. There's that resistance within me to opening up to the beauty. And I don't know what it is, but there's just, we seem to have it. Okay. So secondly, I'll just talk about transference of merits. Okay. What can I just deduce, maybe? So basically, I suppose the transference of merits is a bit like, as Vidania said, we build up our spiritual momentum and then we give it away. We give it away. Fantastic. And in a way, it's a bit like the Metta Bhavana in the last stage. It's like, just give it all away to all beings. And as I said, I used to go to practice with the Tibetan group, and when we went for a walk, you could see the monks and nuns, if they saw a beautiful view, like we've got here, they would imagine giving it to all beings. So even things like a view, they wouldn't hold on for themselves. It's like they wanted to share that experience with everybody. And I think that's very much, that's transferring our merits. Yeah, actually I won't say any more than that. Okay, so self-surrender. So self-surrender very much doesn't come out of self-hate. So it's the opposite. It comes from a really healthy self-love, actually. Because what we're giving away when we self-surrender, we give away that kind of weird sense that we all have, that sense, it's not weird, it feels natural to us, that we're separate from everything else. We give that away, and that allows us to just join in the flow of reality. And it's a bit like, I was thinking, like, if you have a beautiful mountain stream like you might get around here, so there's a stream coming down, really clear water, so not like you get around here actually, it's not peaty water, very clear water. And what we try and do, it's so beautiful, we want it all for ourselves, so we make ourselves like a little separate pool, we build up some rocks, make ourselves a pool, and we take the water out of the stream, and then what happens? Well, it all goes stagnant and nasty, okay, and there's like, goes green, and there are little flies over it and stuff. Because actually, the whole point of it is that it's flowing, so So it's flow. So self-surrender is when we throw away all those pebbles that get in the way and we join back into the stream, and then we can be part of that beauty again. We knock down what separates ourselves from others. And I think it's just really joyful. It's getting out of our own way. It's that feeling of being in our own way that we'll all experience all the time, really. And just an example, I remember years ago being at a work meeting, and there were all these people that I thought were really important, and I was trying really hard to say things that would kind of impress them and all this stuff. So I was completely self-obsessed. It was like I was in this meeting, and all the time I was thinking, now when can I get in? What can I say that they're going to think is worthwhile? And it was so painful, and I was almost paralysed with my self-obsession, okay? And in the end I thought, I can't be doing this anymore. I'm going to think about what we're trying to achieve with this meeting, and I'm only going to say something if it actually adds to what we're trying to achieve, to the task at the end of it. And it was amazing how my whole experience changed, because no longer was it me, me, me. It was like, okay, what can I do to be part of this? So if somebody's already said a point I think is good, well, I don't need to say it again. I don't, you know what I mean? It's just all I need to do is contribute when I can see that what I'm going to give is actually making this a better meeting. And it really had a big effect on me, actually. And that's what I think that's obviously a very small case, but that's how I think self-surrender is. It's about getting ourselves out of the way. Okay, so what happens when we get ourselves out of the way? So in the puja, it's like by self-surrender, got ourselves out of the way, and then we get to the concluding mantras. And the concluding mantras is where the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas come alive with their characteristics of the enlightened mind. So we have compassion, transforming energy, wisdom coming alive in those mantras for those different figures. At the end, we have the Pranyaparamitā mantra, which means going beyond, completely going beyond. And then we come to the final mantra with Om Shanti, so peace. And I think we sit with each other in the shrine room and we share some sense by letting ourselves get out of the way, by letting those aspects of enlightenment arise. We can sit and we can share some sense, some taste of what it might be actually like to experience that arising, that awakening of the enlightened mind.